Well, hello again and welcome into Interrupting Racism. My name is Brian Prawitz, the host and creator of this program, a program that is supposed to be here for the opportunity for us to talk to leaders around the state of Oregon and talk about some of the big issues that are facing us right now in the state of Oregon. For me, this is the creative way to respond to some of the things that absolutely have made me very frustrated as we've gone through some very, very trying times. But thank you to everybody who's watching. Thank you to everybody who has commented and who seems to appreciate what we've created here. Just a little streamcast, just trying to get some good information out there and share what Oregon and what the nation and what society looks like from the point of view of people that may not look like me. I love talking to people of color. I love talking to people who have had just other experiences in their lives. I have learned so much from talking to the people that we've chatted with on Interrupting Racism and many, many other people as well. And the reason I want to talk to them on Interrupting Racism is because of how fulfilling it is to hear a perspective other than maybe what you're used to getting all the time. So thank you once again for being here and for supporting Interrupting Racism. Today on the program, we want to welcome Vicki Nakashima. Vicki is a retired state of Oregon employee who spent seems like your entire life, Vicki, working on some very, very meaningful things. We're going to talk about civil rights. We're going to talk about BLM. We're going to talk about all kinds of cool stuff today. But I first just want to say thank you for coming on the program and spending some time with me today.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate being invited.
Vicki is also on the board of ALF, the American Leadership Forum of Oregon, which is where many of these thoughts that I just shared with you started because of the impact that program had on me. I'm ALF Class 34. Vicki was in ALF Class 13. And Vicki, how would you introduce yourself? You know, I have this whole bio written here, but what would be the nutshell that you would use to describe yourself or introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, you know, I came up through the civil rights era. And in the late 60s, I started to work and a lot of my activities and life involved the civil rights movement in one way or another, whether it was an interest or a way that I could contribute. And when I started to work professionally, some of my jobs were very involved. And so I call it occupation, that I had the good fortune of starting my career in Portland, Oregon, in education, in schools that had not yet been desegregated, and working in programs that serve predominantly students of color who are at a disadvantage. And so my life was very intertwined with the civil rights movement and the activities. I think I shared with you at one point that I was a volunteer with the Black Panther Party in Portland. And as a result, I was interviewed for a book about the Portland Black Panthers that's currently on sale at the Oregon Historical Society and on Amazon. But there are not too many people who are Asian, Japanese American, who got very involved with programs that served a diverse community of people in need of advocacy. And when I jotted down some of them, I want Brian and the others who are listening to know that may have included youth who were struggling and families who were not successful in school, and we needed a new school system. I spent a number of years working with ex-offenders from the Oregon State Penitentiary. I volunteered with the Black Panthers and served on their board for the Sickle Cell Anemia Foundation. So there are many experiences that I had because of the work I entered at that time. Now, keep in mind that description, I am now 73 years old. So I've had a lifetime of experiences, almost the entire thing in the public sector. At one point during my career, during the 90s, Nike had experienced a threatened boycott by Jesse Jackson and Push. And as a result, Nike decided to invest in programs to help them become more active in the African American community and to try to get more people of color on their board. And I was invited to go there for 6 months as a loaned executive to help them start an internship program and a relationship with the National Urban League. As a result of that, I was offered a job to work on diversity issues, and I spent 2 years at Nike doing work in organizational development and diversity in Nike customer service. After the 2 years, I was invited to go back to the state of Oregon, and I continued to work there until 2005, when I officially retired. But during that time, I'd served in a number of capacities in human resources, civil rights. I was the Indian Child Welfare Act coordinator for the state when that act first started. I was the director of multicultural health for the state for 5 years. And when I retired, which is kind of a fun story that Brian mentioned, I had helped start a project called Say Hey. And you probably don't know, it's Say Hey is a greeting in the a commonly used greeting in the African American community. And Say Hey was started because the state of Oregon recruited professionals and leaders of color, and it was hard to get them to relocate to Oregon, and harder yet, we couldn't get people to necessarily stay. The retention rate was not good, and people left frustrated and unhappy. So Say Hey was an effort started in about 2002. We would have something very simple. It was a welcome party for people who had relocated here for a professional or leadership career in Oregon. And we served beer and wine, and we replated appetizers from Costco. And the first one we held in 2002, we thought, oh, if 50 people show up, we'll be happy. But 250 people showed up at the door wanting to come welcome the people who had relocated here. And since that time, it's now turned into a nonprofit called Partners in Diversity. And we have members throughout the state, including Southern Oregon. We have some from Southern Oregon, Central Oregon, Portland Metro, the Valley, most of the colleges and universities, and private and public sector, as well as Southwest Washington. So we now have about 350 financial sponsors and members who support us annually. And our event, Say Hey, which is held quarterly, and there will be one February 7th that you're welcome to come to virtually. We attract 500 to 700 people who want to be there to welcome newcomers. And the newcomers could be a new CEO of a large company, or a college president, or a barber or teacher. And it's a way of helping welcome them and introduce them to the communities and to connect with people and programs and interests that may keep them here for the long run. So in a nutshell, that's my career. There have been many steps along the way. And I think, Brian, when we first talked, you thought, oh my goodness, if she starts talking about all this, we'll be here all night.
Well, the great news is we don't have a time limit, so you could talk about it all night if you really wanted to. So many things to talk about in that introduction. I want to know why do I have an image of the Black Panthers as being a militant, dangerous African American group? Is that because, first of all, I haven't studied much about it, but also this perception that maybe is in my network of people as I was growing up with very little exposure to a group like that. What is the purpose of the Black Panthers, and what are they?
Well, you know, and it was started in Oakland, and there were chapters, and Portland's chapter was an early chapter. They were advocates, and I guess if you really look at what is militant, there are people who think I'm militant. I'm 5 foot tall, weigh 100 pounds, and so if I'm carrying a sign, I don't look like much of a threat. And I think in some ways you are such an advocate that you are helping to carry a message. Now, certainly there are levels of advocacy, and the Black Panthers were activists in the community around political activism and injustice, and they would have protests, and they were not fearful of conflict. But I can tell you, back in the 60s, when I was just beginning my career, there were many people on the streets, just as they are today, who you couldn't distinguish from. They were my neighbors, they were my friends, they were faith leaders, they were grandmothers, and you would not say, gosh, these are dangerous people. And Portland, most of the people who were involved at the time were local. But in addition to whatever advocacy or whatever broken window that may have happened as a result of a march, they also started the Free People's Clinic, which was a medical clinic in Portland that served people who couldn't pay for medical care. It was staffed by, one of the people was a Dr. London Smith, who was known as the children's doctors, one of the most famous pediatricians who had done work around diet and nutrition and treatment of hyperactivity, which he felt led to behavior that resulted in encounters with the justice system. They also had a free meals program where they served free meals, and many, many volunteers, teachers and faith leaders and people who worked in hospitals and other places volunteered to raise money, prepare and serve meals for the community without cost. And we have a lot of that today, you know, people who are volunteering to do that. So even nationally, they were known for their good work. And they often had community forums to try to bring people together, and often people like me disagreed with them. But we supported the good work that they did, and we felt that we had an avenue for dialogue. And I think it was December before last, the person who founded the Black Panthers, Kent Ford, was invited to Marylhurst University, or to Mary's Woods at Marylhurst. I was on the board of both Marylhurst University and now on Mary's Woods, which is a senior living facility. But he spoke about the history of the Black Panthers, and they invited the residents of the senior living facility to come and hear him speak. And they filled the chapel. Almost all white senior citizens, mostly from Oregon, or who had moved here and knew about those days because they were living at that time. And they came because they were just fascinated to hear more about what life was like and to hear Kent's stories about the hardships they faced and what were some of the issues that people didn't understand. So even today, even though we're in our 70s and 80s, and many of the people are now deceased who were part of that civil rights movement, lived a life of great admiration, ended up in leadership positions, and have been embraced by the community for their work.
Well, I mean, you've already touched on the similarities to some of the things we've seen today. What do you see happening today that is similar to some of the things that you just referred to?
Well, I remember when John Lewis crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge on television. So just all the images of the pain and the hardships that people went through during the 60s, and to the degree that the South had huge activism and lots of people involved. Portland did not have quite the numbers, but Portland and Seattle had many activists that, and Portland has always been kind of known for. What I guess I remember is that I remember at one point somebody near a park in Northeast Portland that was always known for some disruption of political activity. My car window, a brick hit it or a rock hit it and it cracked. It didn't break and hurt me or anything as I was driving by. And later, a favorite restaurant that I went to often at Lloyd Center that hired a lot of African-American young people. This young man came up to me at the end of the line and he said, "I have to admit to you that I threw the rock that broke your window. And I knew immediately that you were our customer, you know, that I saw you and that you were always kind to me." And he handed me like $20 to try to contribute to my window. Mm. So that's our activist. I mean, I will never forget that. You know, I will always appreciate. But the images that come back are not of fear. You know, right now, some of the activity going on, there've been you know, marches and protests where many people like me have gone to support, but there are also some very threatening, I guess, dangerous protests in Portland. And we've gotten an image for the hatred. I get calls from family members on the East Coast that think I must live in hell. And I try to explain to them about, well, we hear about the extreme activities, but we don't hear about, for most of it, the protests, they're people that start out or hold peaceful protests and want to get their message across. And then there's some people who just use it for the wrong reasons. So those things remind me a lot. The idea that, and we have known that, I mean, anyone who's been really involved, we know that Black men are incarcerated at a higher rate than, and people of color, even some Asian communities have been incarcerated at a higher level, or been shot by police, or have been in danger of police activity, either because their communities were not understood or for whatever reason. And that has just not gone away, and it's gotten worse, and it's gotten more attention, fortunately. But so much of it for us that remember and were involved, we feel like it's kind of gone full circle.
I get a sense also from people who really have been activists their entire lives and that are of a similar age as you are, that it's a bit exhausting because your efforts in the 60s, for instance, or throughout your entire life, part of it was in the hopes that this would never happen, or that we would gain ground, or things would be better. How do you balance that? How are you sort of processing that comparison, or the success of the work that you've been doing for so many years?
You know, there's much of this work that has not gone away because of all the time and distance from the 60s and 70s. Certainly, if you look at our workforce, we still, you know, I think there's still only one Fortune 500 CEO who's African American female in the whole country. That if you look at many large organizations in Oregon, they struggle. Their marketplace is very diverse and multicultural. So if you are Nike, your marketplace isn't made up of just white males. It's made up of diverse communities, including a global marketplace. And if you do not have a workforce that reflects the people that you want to sell or market to, you don't have a business. I sometimes throw people off by using golf. One of my activities has been involved with trying to get golf to be more welcoming of diversity. Mm-hmm. And there are national and international studies showing that women are many, I don't know if it's $30 billion of untapped interest globally, that the people with disposable income, you know, not poor people necessarily, but if we don't create a pipeline, so more diverse markets are reached with golf won't thrive.
Yeah. And
that's just one example. I mean, I remember a few years ago being on an interview panel for a woman, for a position, a chief diversity officer, and one of the candidates fascinated me. She was the chief diversity officer for Harley Davidson. And in my image, I always was fearful of people. If you see a gang of people drive up, you know, and you're in Eastern Oregon and they're all riding Harley Davidsons, my image was that, oh, you know, maybe I should stay in my car. She talked about how Harley Davidson has invested millions and millions of dollars. They have African American groups that they support that go on outings sponsored at least in part by Harley Davidson, that have 5,000 riders show up thousands of miles from their homes to get together and to share their love and passion for motorcycles.
They're Harleys, yeah.
For Harleys. And there are other communities that do that. And I was just stunned. I was sort of, my mouth was kind of hanging open thinking, wow, that's a story to tell. So it's not just, so I think there's some indicators where we've become more enlightened, but also become more aware of where we need to overcome some of the barriers to really not only changing, you know, who's involved and who gets to take part. I think that's very important. And our demographics are changing significantly. Beaverton, Oregon, which you probably visit every once in a while, is majority minority. Bellevue, Washington, where Microsoft and Costco and all of those big companies. Bellevue, when I grew up in Kirkland next door, you could count the number of Japanese families in Kirkland, Washington, and in Bellevue. Mm-hmm. Today, it's majority minority, and it's not because they don't have a representative community of different socioeconomic groups. But also it's not, if you don't market, if you believe that if you go to Bellevue and start a business that you're only going to deal with non-diverse communities, you're wrong.
So there's some of the evidence of progress. I mean, and I think about young people right now, and kids. Our kids are growing up in the most diverse society that we've ever seen. And I think maybe where my motivation comes is, for some people, that's a frightening thing. And what I'm learning and what I have learned through expanding my network, expanding my friends, diversifying my friends, what I have found is that the more diversity, the more amazing, the more you can, I know the studies show that there's more. If you want to argue economics, it's better economically. If you want to argue health, it's better for your health. There's a myriad of reasons why increased diversity is a better thing. And we still have places where it's not seen that way. And I think that's motivating me to speak to my network as much as I can with conversations like this. We're talking with Vicki Nakashima here on Interrupting Racism. We have a couple of Facebook channels right now that are streaming this live, and also our Interrupting Racism YouTube channel as well. And we can see your comments. So if you would like to ask a question or make a point or say something, we can see it. So please do. Vicki.
You said, I don't know that I answered your question about, you were talking about how this has changed over the years and how it affected me. And I guess I want to say that in some ways it could be discouraging, but it's also made me more determined. I think during my career, I did something for ALF for women in leadership a couple of weeks ago, and they asked what qualities did I feel I had that were valuable or useful to me in my career. And the one that I really pointed out was that I'm known as being very persistent. And that could be described in other, I'm just dogged or
it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Because I'll drag out something that I found in a box and say, oh, I remember this. Maybe I should bring it up again, and I think that has helped me. I get more determined. I mean, I find things that maybe I couldn't change, and I couldn't get my point across, or it was wrong timing, and I do believe in what Joel Jaworski said in his book about synchronicity, that it's coincidence. Often creating change is about coincidence, and our methods can be very different. So while if you're 6 foot tall and you have a gun, you could yell at somebody. If I'm 5 foot tall and I'm in a setting to try to convince somebody that they should interrupt their thinking, then I may have an entirely different strategy. And it could not be effective, but it could be effective. And in some cases, that is the coincidence of whether it's timing or the approach or your relationship. If it's somebody who's very angry and emotional, I think we know from some of the wisdom that has helped to guide me is that you can't deal with the facts until you deal with the emotion.
I just really want to sit there on that for half a second, or have a chance to think about that again a little later. You can't deal with the facts until you deal with the emotion. That seems like a really simple thing to have learned, or a simple fact, but boy, it's driving a lot of stuff right now. Emotion, for sure. Wow. You stopped me right in my tracks, Vicki.
Well, yeah, and I learned that from a highway engineer, the head of Oregon Department of Transportation. And he's
a highway engineer came out with that. That sounds like a poet laureate would have popped that out.
And I mean, I always believed they were so black and white,
Sure.
that they were trained to be that way. But he wrote that on a board, and it stopped me in my tracks. But I have repeated that.
I'm going to write that down. I might tattoo that on my arm, actually, as a very emotional human being. There's a few things here that I just absolutely can't wait to talk to you more about. I want to hear some stories about Partners in Diversity, and it may also be Say Hey, but you and I talked about the effort to welcome, and you've touched on it already, but your effort to welcome officials, administrators or leaders in communities and in organizations that move to Oregon who are people of color, and having that ability to welcome them and try to support them. It's a fascinating story, especially given the history of Oregon and your experience with Partners in Diversity. What can you share about that?
Well, it was such a simple concept. Some of the best strategies are not complicated. And what we found is when we recruited people, and that was my job, I managed recruitment of state employees. But when we brought people to Salem for a leadership position, I remember a Black woman who was a physician saying she was pregnant. And she and her husband were going to have their baby here. And the husband came to my office one day and he said, I think our baby will be the first baby ever born in Salem. And I talked to him and I said, no, that's not true. That's not true. But that was the image. Is that
the first baby or the first
Black baby?
Baby of, okay.
I mean, he really believed, because of his experience several months out after moving to Salem, because they didn't connect with other families of color. They had no cultural experience in terms of hopes that their children, their baby, would go to school with other kids of color in the community, that the wife, in her position as an executive, that she went into her building every day on state property and never saw another person who looked like her. There were no cultural activities in terms of theater or music or food. And it's pretty hard to retain talent if you don't connect. And that doesn't just mean culturally. It means that you can offer somebody a great job that they wouldn't have gotten somewhere else, but that isn't necessarily what's going to keep them there. What will keep them there is whether they engage in the community, that maybe they have an interest in connecting with a faith community, that they come without a network of people to support them. So our first event that we had was for a vice provost at Portland State, and he's African American. He moved here, and we had a little get together, and somebody brought a crock pot of meatballs and a fruit tray, and we each brought a bottle of 2-buck chuck wine, and we had 60 people show up, and every person wrote a little card. Here's my tip for getting acquainted with Oregon. It was everything from, here's my favorite, here's a radio station that plays jazz on Saturday. If you want to go to church, I go to a really neat church and I'd love to take you with me so you get to meet some of the people at the church. Or, gosh, if you need a babysitter, I have teenagers who would love to babysit for you. Anyway, there were 60 cards left for him. And I ran into him 20 years later. And he said, Vicki, I still have all of those cards.
Oh, that's amazing.
I still have all of those cards. And that was the first one. People came up to us, many others helped plan these things, but and said, oh, we should do this all the time. And we started to do it. We would raise $600. We'd go to Costco and we'd buy platters of food and we'd buy 2 buck chuck wine, and we would charge whoever sponsored $600 to pay for it. We didn't have any staff. It was all volunteer. And that grew to the point where we were introducing over 50 people a quarter. And we outgrew several facilities. We finally had to go to the convention center or the Portland Art Museum in order to accommodate.
What does that say? Does it say that it's just that important for us to connect, or does that say that this was so needed and so rare that anybody who was a person of color who wanted to feel connected to the community just made sure they came because it was so important and so rare? What do you think?
It's probably a little of both, but I guess, we made a real effort. When people arrived, they thought, is this a networking event where I can get a job because all the employers are here? Or we weren't quite sure. And so we had our volunteers and board and people who were involved, we'd say, your job is to welcome anybody with a special name tag on and to honor them and to help them feel comfortable. That's your job. You're not here to network. And if I see you hanging out with all of the people who work together, you're getting split up. You're getting split up. That's what they have to experience coming here.
Yeah.
Is that they don't know people. And we've done some video work later. We've done some studies, as I mentioned to you, about retention. But we hear often that people will say, when I arrived here 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the people I met at Say Hey are still in my friend circle.
But you also found out that the number of people that stayed was a little bit disappointing.
Indeed, yeah. We did a study. Actually, because when we started this, the corporations that fund us say, yeah, we've got anecdotal information from you guys and from our recruiters and our HR staff that say, oh yeah, people of color arrive here and it's hard to make friends because you don't have social engagement. You're a new lawyer at a big law firm and you don't have time to get out and to meet other people. And so there are all these kind of built-in barriers that if you're an employer, you can't say, oh, do you have kids? Do you want your kids to go to to get involved in maybe programs that are culturally specific as part of their recreation? Do you know there's an African American Golf Association in Portland? So there are all these kind of things that people don't know about, and then they end up. So this study was a research study conducted by a PhD who his research organizational development and psychology, Portland State University, and he did a in-depth study of, we had over 2,000 honorees, say hey honorees that have arrived here who are on our rolls. And he was able to do in-depth interviews to compile a survey that was offered electronically to all 2,000, over 2,000 honorees, to try to collect data if they arrived here and stayed, why, if they arrived here and left, why, and if they, and more detail about what their experience was. And what came back was quite alarming in many ways. We expected, because we've heard before, that how difficult it is. There were comments, there were kind of areas of concern that were expressed. Kind of lack of policies and procedures within their organizations that they worked for was an issue. A lack of a network to help support new people arriving and helping them acclimate to the community was an important one. A career path. How do they move between organizations and progress in their career? So there were a number of things, and everything from one of them that we heard over and over again. Well, several that we heard over and over again. There was overwhelming expression of concern about the discrimination and racism they faced in the workplace. And it wasn't limited to entry-level people or high-level people. It was across the board. That it may have been subtle that people said, oh, why would you move here? Or why would you, common comments. Gosh, there were incidents where we're aware of, and actually there's somebody who did an article about this who's on CNN quite often, but that they were African American or Asian, and patients in the ER refused to have them treat them, even though they were in a life and death crisis. They refused to have someone treat them because of their race. And there were the other thing that I wanted to mention to you, Brian, is that I didn't expect this quite to the degree, but many people said, I wish I had known about the racist history in Oregon before I decided to come here. Not that I wouldn't have come here, but I may have been differently prepared to adjust or to approach how I transitioned to this community. And whether it be the racist laws and policies or the internment of Japanese Americans on the West Coast, or they wish they understood the racist history, because it's very different if you're moving from Atlanta and did not learn about this in the past. And we make assumptions often that people move here because, they love going to the ocean and to the coast and to the, they love the outdoor recreation. But, in many cases, they arrive here because they feel there's a career opportunity, and they feel that there will be career advancement and a quality of life that will not be as racist as some other places they've lived.
And that is really hard to hear for the first time. That's one of those moments when, as a white person who loves Oregon and has lived there their whole lives and really hasn't been told that or explained that history, or hasn't really faced it or admitted it exists. I mean, it's tough, and I still struggle with sort of taking in new information about the way we look at our forefathers and that history. I love Hamilton. I just watched Hamilton 2 days ago because I miss it. So I just miss, my family's big into the theater and stuff. And so we just miss it. And I cranked that thing up the other day and it was so much fun to watch. And then I watched all the interview stuff afterwards with Lin-Manuel Miranda and just the actors. And they started talking about the irony of the play being basically just about everybody in that entire show is of color, and they're representing the founding fathers. And I don't really want to get too deep into all of that, but just the conversation around slavery, the history of our country, and how it was built. If you're a person of color, it is completely different than the dominant culture, mostly Caucasian people who were taught a certain thing about George Washington's teeth, for instance, and how that legend grows and how it's part of his, amazing storyline and legacy. And there is just so much more to it, and Oregon itself and the history of the state of Oregon. And so if this is new to you, or you're struggling with, if you're watching this and you're like, no, you're fighting back on that, just take a look at history and look at it from the point of view of people of color and ask yourself, what do you need to learn? And what is it like for them? That question and that process and that experience has basically changed my life, and allowed me to reach out and have great conversations like this with people like you, Vicki. And I think about now, I know how hard it is to relocate. I know how hard it is to fit in when you already are in a network of people that look like you. For instance, if I've heard a lot of people move to Roseburg and they leave a few months later or a year or two later and say, I never made any friends. People were not welcoming to me. They found out I was from California or whatever the thing is. And so it's difficult enough already if you look like everyone else. But if you add that other layer, and I know people in my community who are people of color who have said to me about those policy things that don't occur to the administration if they are not at least paying attention or aware or have some reason to have experience in what it would be like to have that same exact policy but be a person of color. Maybe it's access to the building after dark. Maybe it's something that forces you to stay after dark. Maybe it has to do with, well, gosh, it could be anything. There are certain things that are policies and businesses that were set and nobody has a problem with, and then a person of color or maybe a woman goes through those same policies and ends up in danger because this thing was never really thought through, because the white men running the show would never think about it because it doesn't happen the same. Anyway, I get it on that policy front, and I hope other people do, because of how hard it is naturally to relocate to another place and fit in a new environment, in a new company.
Yeah, and I feel like I want to say to you and to the community that we all have our stories. I mean, because I'm a woman of color or my age doesn't mean my stories are more important or less or more meaningful than somebody else's. People who live in rural areas have stories to tell about how it's isolating, and the difficulties they share. So the challenge is trying to figure out, how do we better learn about one another and be open to those changes, and that we view some of the hardships differently. I want to share one with you. I was in a discussion with somebody who really reacted about reparations, and there have been, discussions about the African American community seeking reparations for the injustice of slavery, and I know a lot of people feel very strongly about that. And my take on that comes from a perspective, and I think I shared with you when we talked on the phone, that that I was on a panel for Black Lives Matter for the Japanese American Citizens League. And
yes.
all four of us.
I want to interrupt just a second. Did you hear what Vicki just said? The Japanese American
citizens.
I was going to say Cultural Citizens League had a panel to discuss Black Lives Matter and the BLM movement. That just let that sink in just for half a second. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to make that point. I think I know where you're going, and I can't wait to hear the rest of it. I'm sorry I stopped you, but.
Well, the panel, there were four of us, and when we got into the discussion, somehow I got to, did your parents or grandparents, because we had 20-something, we had two of us in our 70s and someone else who's maybe 50. And all of them said, no, my parents and grandparents never said a word. I mean, in fact, the younger woman who's a PhD and has studied this racism and social justice, she said her grandmother would just shut her off if she asked a question. She wouldn't ask, she wouldn't talk.
About what topic?
About the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. And so that was very interesting, but it was also my experience. I always thought camp, the internment camp, the incarceration, that's where kids were born, people got married, you learned to do the tango. I mean, I had no idea. And I think I told you that I showed Arabian horses for almost my whole life. But as a child, I had a horse. I had the good fortune to have a horse. And I didn't learn until going to college that my mother would never go to a horse show because she had to live in a horse stall during Camp Harmony, which was the preparation to go to the barracks in the internment camp. And so many people tell that story of having to live in a stall that you could see the outside, and that you had to stuff the newspapers into the open spaces to try to keep the sand out, and how it smelled like horse manure or cow manure. And so anyway, I watched a Minidoka pilgrimage panel with all people who are Sansei, which they are third generation in the United States, meaning their parents immigrated here, their parents were born here, and now their generation is aging like I am. Some of them are in their 80s. The question came up of 4 people. Did your parents ever talk to you about camp and what it was like? And all 4 of them said no. So what I know is that for my aunts and uncles and my parents who were interned, my father was in architecture school at the University of Washington. My parents had just built a home that my father designed on Beacon Hill in Seattle, and they lost the house. They lost all of their property except what they could carry to the camp. And when the idea of reparation came up, both of my parents and all of my aunts and uncles had been deceased. They were gone. And the percentage of people who went to camp, and that's the last generation that could have gone to camp. And so I'm too young to have gone to camp, but the people who were older, I was born in 47, but people who were born earlier in the 40s, they did go to camp. They were little kids, but they went to camp. Their experience was entirely different. And so when the reparations, they're a really small percentage, I don't know what it is, actually got that $20,000, which was pennies on the dollar of what they lost. Many of them, they were well established. They were third generation in the United States. Many of the 120,000 were successful, educated, US citizens, had kids, but they, until reparations, and this is what I will contend, until they got an apology, and the payment was not necessarily the tipping point for them, but it meant that the government, US government, was serious about their apology. It was proof that there was an admission of guilt, that it was unconstitutional. And that was the point at which most of our families started talking. So the benefit wasn't the money. It meant nothing to, I mean, I would imagine a lot of it was donated to efforts in the community to end disparities. But it was the symbolism of the apology and the sincerity that the reparations. So often when somebody says, I can't accept reparation, I can understand why that is important.
Well, one of the big questions that I asked myself a lot is, well, what can I do? Like, okay, I have an African-American friend. They are still affected by the history of their own family as they've come out of slavery, the damage that has done. We've talked to people here on Interrupting Racism who are only a couple of generations removed from slaves in their family. And it's still, and it probably always will be, a major issue for them to deal with. And that sounds strange coming from me, the way I think about it. But it's like, okay, what do I do about that? Like, I can't fix that for you. I can't, Vicki, I can't do anything necessarily to make it better that people who look like me made the decision to harm people that look like you with that executive order during World War II. And I've struggled with that at times in saying, what am I supposed to do? What can I possibly do? But I think the way it comes down for me is, I think what I can possibly do is learn your history and ask questions and have respect towards people's past, toward the history of different peoples in the United States, in order to be able to do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't happen again, I guess. I mean, is that a start? Am I onto the right track there? What else would you add to that?
I would add to that the Oregon Japanese American Museum in Portland, they have a traveling exhibit about camp, and I would want Roseburg and the school district and the churches to know that there are people in Portland who are willing to go with that exhibit if COVID allows us to, but to tell your children, to tell your neighbors about the history. And it doesn't have to be all negative or painful, but for the the community to have brought better knowledge. I mean, I think still today we hear from people who we would assume know about the internment and what it was like. I have to tell you that this panel from the Minidoka, which I think I sent you the link, maybe.
Yeah.
I learned some things about the hardships that they lived through from those stories. That was incredibly enlightening to me, and made me very sad. But I appreciated knowing. Those were things that I didn't know. So if I didn't know, I don't expect your neighbors to know. One of the stories in there is this woman who was on the panel, and she told the story about going to Roseburg, like, I don't know what year, maybe in the 70s, I don't know, I'm just guessing, to talk to the school district. And my first reaction was, gosh, that was really brave of you. I mean, I don't know why, but I thought, as a volunteer, someone on the interviewers, I think, asked the question, why are you such an activist, and what do you think you can change? And she talked about being able to educate people, because we don't have the educational materials to really help children understand. And you may have a contact on the Oregon coast that none of us would have. You may know of a new business owner. I remember one day I was in Medford for the Urban Rural Connect for ALF, and I drove into a Handy Mart, and there was a Korean owner there. I didn't know he was an owner until I paid for my gas and we started talking. It turned out he had lived here and where I live in Camas, Washington. And he was so excited that I lived in Camas. And we started talking about what it was like. And he talked about how he knew exactly how many Korean people and how they would gather to be able to maybe get Korean groceries that are not available in Medford. And about, the language and the cultural differences. We have lots of businesses in Southern Oregon that really, they hire people to do work in Asia. So they'd benefit from knowing more about the culture, not just here, but in Asia, and the lives of communities that lived here. So if Harry and David, a global company, wants to make sure they have markets in other countries, they need people who can speak the language, understand the culture, help with their research and development to meet the needs of customers who don't live here, look like us.
I appreciate your time. You were asking how long do we usually go with interrupting racism? Usually I short sell that because I don't want somebody to think they have to fill an hour, but we get going. Like I said, we get going and all of a sudden time goes by and here we are, we're an hour in. I think we've hit on most everything I really wanted to talk to you about, and I appreciate your insight and your time and your experience. I wanted to just put in a little plug for ALF. ALF is the American Leadership Forum of Oregon. It's a national organization, but we have one in Oregon that takes people from all over the state, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, orientation, gender. You can think of all the different ways that we're different in Oregon. It takes about 20 people from rural and urban, puts them together for a year. Every month you meet, and over time there's this understanding that grows within that cohort. And ALF has been a very important part of both of our lives. What how has ALF helped shape maybe what catches your attention or how you process what you see? And is there a repeating theme you keep seeing right now that you want to share with our audience?
Well, ALF has become, it is such an amazing network of people. I think I look back on my career and my life, and I think I really intentionally made an effort to be around people who were not like me. I think too often it's easy if you are a Republican to only have Republican friends, or if you work for the state of Oregon, in Salem, Oregon, where thousands and thousands of people live and work, your friends, your colleagues, your children's friends are all associated with the state. And what ALF does that can't be done in other ways necessarily is it creates a network of people who are different. And hopefully it inspires you to continue that. As I mentioned, I have grown up, and it wasn't until I was 55 years old that I sold my last horse. I owned and showed Arabian horses for my whole lifetime. And in that hobby, I was around people who were totally not like me. We didn't agree in many, many ways. Many of them had lots of money. I didn't have lots of money. I had a state job, and I would wear hand-me-down suits to show in, but I had quite a bit of success over my lifetime. I sold my last horse and took up golf, heaven forbid. Heaven forbid.
Almost as an expensive pursuit as horses. Sometimes.
Absolutely. And I volunteered until this last year. My back was bothering me and I couldn't volunteer. But I volunteered for 10 years, 11 years at Camas Meadows Golf Club as a marshal to get free golf at one of the best golf courses in northern Oregon, the region. It's actually in Washington. And I would ride around in my little red golf cart and say, "Could you play faster?"
I need you where I play golf. That'd be
play faster.
There's that tenaciousness we talked about.
Yeah. So, I mean, I really, really encourage people. You can go through ALF, but take that mentality. I mean, that's how we expand our thinking, is to be around other people that are different or who think differently, and figure out how to engage with them and to find common ground. And ALF did that to me in a network that has been with me my whole career. I've been recently, since being on the board, going through and finding people that I haven't seen in a long time, and looking through LinkedIn and trying to find them, and then write to them and say, "How are you doing?" and to re-engage that network. But also to build on the newer network, people like you who I didn't know, that I can add to my network. And now there are, 800 senior fellows and a whole national network of leaders that you can contact if you want to go play golf in North Carolina. There's somebody there.
Yes, and we want people to swing over to alforegon.org. The network of Douglas County Alfies, as we call ourselves, actually still has Zoom calls about twice a month to just check in, see how you're doing, and do the famous ALF check-in. Last thing for you, Vicki, just touching on sort of a way to cap. Is there a thing you find yourself thinking about more and more often, or a message that you'd like to share that means something to you, considering taking in everything that's happening around us right now?
Well, our history is so important, and I truly believe the tragedy of the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II is that it did interrupt the passing down of the history, and I'd have to tell you, Brian, that I am learning daily about things that happened to my family. It's been in the last 3 or 4 months that I learned that where the whole family went to Minidoka, Idaho, that I kind of knew, but that my parents, because my father was an activist and wrote an article that objected to the treatment of Japanese Americans in the camp, ended up being transferred, my family, to the prison-like facility at Tule Lake, and that he in fact may have been incarcerated for part or all of the duration they were there in Tule Lake. And so many of us are learning or not learning, if our families didn't pass it down, that history. Now, I have the good fortune to have relatives who've done quite a bit of research. I have a relative who's doing a documentary on an uncle who's a noted international craftsman, and it includes information about the family. I have an artist cousin who was invited to do pieces that Japanese American artists are doing for a traveling exhibit that will go around the country. And a part of that exhibit is dedicated to my father's experience of being an activist. And so, you know, to me, that comes up, and it also comes up for until, you know, I don't know if people knew a lot about John Lewis until he became well known, you know, in interviews, and then his passing, we've learned a lot about him. But I just think that the younger generations may not get this history, whether they're people of color or live in Roseburg. You know, how do we make sure that history isn't ignored or forgotten? You know, I hope there's a little section in every library that people are encouraged to visit, or when you put pictures up about the history of Oregon, that they include pictures of tribal history, Asian history, African American history, because it's so rich and deep, no matter where you are. So that seems like the most important thing to me right now.
What can you give us a book or two, or a website or a person who people can follow or look up on the internment?
Yeah, the Japanese, well, there's the Japanese American National Museum located in Los Angeles, California. They have many, many resources and free exhibits and virtual programs. There's a Japanese American Museum in Portland that's just reopening. There's featuring a study or an exhibit soon about women, Japanese American women. And there's a program called Densho, DENSHO, in Seattle, and they've done extensive research on the Japanese American history and internment in the US, and their resources are accessible to the public and easily accessed by people who are just curious.
I want to add to that list the book Stubborn Twig, especially in Oregon. The story of Yasao Masui and his family in Hood River. His son was one of the people who tested the constitutionality of the curfew for Japanese Americans in Portland during the time of the internment and during the war. His story is incredible. His roots, his legacy in Hood River is incredible as well. And so I would highly recommend people look that up. That book, that was step 2 in my learning about this. Step 1 was accidentally, we were in San Francisco on a vacation and went through the Presidio, and in their museum, they had a huge, exhibit on the executive order that led to the internment. And I mean, I'm a grown adult, and I really hadn't heard much about it, and I was very upset that I was learning about it for the first time at 40 years old or however old I was. And then to read The Stubborn Twig, that book, truly, really fantastic, because it brings it home, because it's Oregon. And, sometimes you read these stories and it seems like so far away, and it's not at all. So, so there's a little bit out there for people who are watching who want to learn more about the internment as we wrap things up here today with Vicki Nakashima. I wanted to throw a few things here. We have on Facebook and YouTube some comments that came through, so I thought I'd share a few things here, Vicki, as we head out the door. First from Melissa. She loves that conversation. And then Mark here in Roseburg. Love hearing the stories of other Japanese Americans. Thank you for sharing. That's really great.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. And then friend of mine here in town, powerful stuff. Yes, indeed. Ashley, thank you very much for your comment. We always can see comments that come through on Facebook and YouTube. And, it's 2:00 on a Tuesday. And so we don't exactly draw 1 million people watching, but these videos live on our YouTube channel. And Vicki, I hope that you feel good enough about this conversation that you could share it within your network. And also, obviously, we're hoping that people in ALF and every network out there, whether you are in Roseburg or in Portland or someplace else, that this conversation and conversations like this engage your brain and give you a sense of togetherness at a time when it seems like everything that's happening around us is just divisive and angry. Just a respectful conversation, a civil conversation between people who don't know much about each other but want to learn is so powerful. It's absolutely life-changing. And so I wish that for everybody out there. But Vicki, thank you once again for your time. And
I want to thank you for doing what you do.
It's a pleasure, and it's fun. It gives me a place to get some of this stuff out, like maybe push something positive back out there into the world once in a while. So
very good. I'm all for that.
Thank you very much. And thank you for serving on the ALF board as well. So that's today's episode of Interrupting Racism. Hang tight there, Vicki. I'll be back to you in just 1 second. You can learn more, as we have said, at alf.org, alforegon.org. Also, if you wanted to learn more about some of the things that Vicki was talking about with Say Hey and Partners in Diversity, visit partnersindiversity.org. And then also we have T-shirts like this one with some sayings on them that might resonate with you. We'd invite you to go to speakupwithus.com and buy a T-shirt in support of this program. The revenue from the T-shirts is going to the Black United Fund of Portland to support their outstanding work. If you have any other comments, we certainly come back and take a look at them as time goes by. And we hope that you enjoy this and that you share it and that you join us again as we continue to do our best to take steps to interrupt racism. Thank you for being here with us today.